Hey there, and welcome to Crazy Pepper, the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that bell and let the drama begin. At the Christmas table, my wife shoved me aside like I was a piece of unwanted furniture. Move! This seat is reserved for my ex, my daughter's real father. The words hit the dining room like a sledgehammer through stained glass. 23 people around my mahogany table, the table I'd bought with money from my restaurant empire, went dead silent. The prime rib was still steaming, the wine still flowing, but suddenly the feast tasted like ash in my mouth. My name is Nick Everett, and I own 3 of the most successful restaurants in Cedar Falls, Michigan. I'm 39 years old, built my fortune from nothing, and until this moment, I thought I had a family worth protecting. Turns out I'd been carving Christmas dinner for people who'd feed me to the wolves without blinking. Miranda, my wife of 7 years, stood there in her designer red dress, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary, with her hand on her hip like she was directing traffic. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were cold as January ice. What the hell is going on here? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. That's when 19-year-old Chloe, my stepdaughter, decided to twist the knife. She jumped up from her chair, pointing her manicured finger at me like I was some kind of disease. If you're not satisfied with the arrangement, get out! She screamed, her voice shrill enough than to crack crystal. This is about real family, not some replacement daddy who thinks he can buy love with fancy dinners. The room exploded into uncomfortable murmurs. Miranda's friends, Karen and Tessa, exchanged knowing looks, the kind that told me they'd been in on this little performance from the beginning. My own sister, Janet, looked mortified. My business partner, Jules Porter, who'd been my best friend since high school, started to stand up, but I held up my hand. Brad Harlan, Miranda's ex, Chloe's biological father, waltzed through my front door like he owned the place. 6'2", still handsome despite the beer gut and the 5 o'clock shadow that screamed unemployed loser. He was wearing jeans to my formal Christmas dinner, and he had the audacity to smile at me. Hey there, Nick, he said, settling into my chair at the head of the table. Thanks for keeping my spot warm. I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me, some shocked, some embarrassed, some, like Karen and Tessa, barely hiding their amusement. Miranda stood behind Brad's chair with her hand on his shoulder, and I realized this wasn't a spontaneous moment. This was a planned execution. 7 years, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. 7 years of paying for everything, supporting everyone, building a life for people who apparently think I'm disposable. Miranda's voice was ice cold when she responded. Don't be dramatic, Nick. You knew what this was. You knew Chloe needed her real father in her life. Her real father who's been in and out of jail for the past 5 years? I asked. Her real father who hasn't paid a dime of child support since she was 12? Chloe slammed her wine glass down so hard it shattered. At least he's not trying to buy us. At least he doesn't think money solves everything. The irony was beautiful. She was wearing a $1,500 necklace I'd given her for her birthday last month, sitting in a house I'd bought, eating food I'd paid for, and lecturing me about money not solving everything. I stood up slowly, folding my napkin and placing it beside my untouched plate. The room held its breath. You're absolutely right, Chloe, I said, my voice calm as a lake before a storm. Money doesn't solve everything, but it sure as hell makes things interesting when it disappears. I walked toward the door, grabbing my coat from the closet. Behind me, I heard Brad laugh, a harsh braying sound that made my skin crawl. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, buddy, he called. Real men don't run away from family discussions. I turned back one last time, looking at Miranda. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Enjoy your family reunion. Then I walked out of my own house, leaving behind 23 people and the wreckage of what I'd thought was my life. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but when you build an empire from nothing, you learn to protect yourself from everyone, even the people you love, especially the people you love. I sat in my Mercedes in the driveway for exactly 3 minutes, watching through the dining room windows as my former family celebrated my departure. Brad was already carving the roast, playing patriarch with my silverware. Miranda was refilling wine glasses, playing hostess in my house. The sight should have broken my heart, but instead, it crystallized something cold and sharp in my chest. I pulled out my phone and made the first call. Everett Holdings, this is Sarah. Sarah, it's Nick. I need you to execute Protocol 7 immediately. Sarah Martinez had been my personal attorney for 6 years. She was sharp as a razor and twice as cutting when she needed to be. She'd helped me set up what we called Protocol 7 18 months ago, when Miranda's behavior first started raising red flags. Are you certain, Nick? Once we start this, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Consider it done. The paperwork will be filed within the hour. All accounts will be frozen by morning. The beautiful thing about being a successful businessman is that you learn to compartmentalize. While my heart was dealing with betrayal, my brain was already 3 moves ahead. Miranda thought she was married to a soft-hearted restaurant owner who'd roll over and play dead. She had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who'd clawed his way up from nothing and had no intention of going back. I drove to my office, a converted warehouse downtown, where I ran my restaurant empire. 3 establishments: Everett's Fine Dining, the Copper Kettle, and Riverside Grill. Together, they employed 47 people and grossed $2.8 million annually. More importantly, they were all in my name. Just like the house, just like the cars, just like everything Miranda thought she could take for granted, Jules was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his pickup truck with a cigarette dangling from his lips. At 40, he still looked like the cop he used to be. Broad shoulders, suspicious eyes, and the kind of calm that comes from seeing the worst of humanity on a daily basis. That bad? He asked. Worse. She brought him to Christmas dinner, kicked me out of my own chair so her ex could play daddy. Jules flicked his cigarette into the snow. Jesus Christ, Nick, what are you going to do? I'm going to teach them the difference between a guest and a host. We went inside, and I opened my office safe. Inside were copies of every important document in my life: property deeds, business licenses, bank account information, and a thick folder labeled Emergency Protocols. I'd learned a long time ago that trust was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. Protocol 7? Jules asked, recognizing the folder. Already in motion. By tomorrow morning, Miranda's going to discover that being married to a wealthy man and having access to his wealth are 2 very different things. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in strategic dismantling. I called my bank and froze all joint accounts. I called my credit card companies and canceled every card with Miranda's name on it. I changed the security codes on the house, the cars, and the restaurant systems. I called my insurance company and removed Miranda and Chloe as beneficiaries. Most importantly, I called Tom Rodriguez, my head of security for the restaurants. Tom was an ex-Marine who'd done 3 tours in Middle East before coming home and deciding he preferred dealing with drunk customers to insurgents. Tom, I need you to do me a favor. Miranda and Chloe are no longer welcome at any of our establishments. If they show up, they're to be treated as trespassers. Understood, boss. What about their friends? I thought about Karen and Tessa, sitting at my table smirking while my marriage imploded. Karen Walsh and Tessa Morrison are also banned. Permanently. Consider it done. By midnight, I'd systematically removed Miranda's access to everything that made her lifestyle possible. The joint checking account that funded her shopping trips? Frozen. The credit cards she used for her weekly spa visits? Canceled. The restaurant reservations she used to impress her friends? Blacklisted. Jules poured himself a whiskey from the bottle I kept in my desk drawer. You know she's going to lose her mind when she figures this out. That's the point. She wanted to play games with my emotions. Now we're going to play games with her reality. My phone buzzed with a text message from Miranda. Where did you go? Come back so we can talk like adults. I showed the message to Jules, who snorted with laughter. Talk like adults? After she humiliated you in front of 23 people? I typed back. I'm at the office. Your access to the house has been revoked. Tell your real husband he can pay for a hotel tonight. The response came back in seconds. What do you mean, revoked? I turned off my phone and poured myself a whiskey. Let the games begin. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in my office, having spent the night on the leather couch I kept for late business meetings. My neck was stiff, my suit was wrinkled, but my mind was crystal clear.
I'd slept better than I had in months. My phone showed 37 missed calls and 42 text messages. I scrolled through them with the detached interest of a scientist studying bacteria. The progression was beautiful in its predictability. 11:47 p.m. Miranda. Nick, this isn't funny. Come home. 12:15 a.m. Miranda. The alarm system isn't accepting my code. 12:33 3 a.m. Chloe, what did you do to the house? 1:22 a.m. Miranda. My credit card was declined at the hotel. Fix this now. 2:45 a.m. 2:45 a.m. Chloe. You're being a petty a-hole. This is embarrassing. 3:18 a.m. Miranda. I'm calling my lawyer in the morning. 4:55 a.m. Brad. Real men don't play these kinds of games. The last message made me laugh out loud. Brad lecturing me about being a real man while he was presumably sleeping in Miranda's car because they couldn't afford a hotel room. I showered in the executive bathroom I'd had installed when I bought the building, put on the spare suit I kept in my office closet, and prepared for what I knew would be an interesting day. At 7 a.m., I drove to the Copper Kettle for breakfast. It was the most popular morning spot in Cedar Falls, and I knew word would spread quickly about my presence there. In a town of 35,000 people, gossip traveled faster than the morning coffee delivery. Sonia Martinez, my restaurant manager and Sarah's younger sister, was waiting for me with a cup of black coffee and a knowing smile. Rough night, boss? Educational night. How's everything here? Smooth as silk. Though I should mention, Mrs. Everett called at 6 a.m. demanding to speak with you. When I told her you weren't here, she tried to reserve the private dining room for lunch. I informed her that her account had been suspended. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She used some words I didn't know she knew. I was halfway through my Eggs Benedict when the front door exploded open and Miranda stormed in, followed by Chloe and a very uncomfortable-looking Brad. Miranda was still wearing her red dress from last night, but it was wrinkled and her makeup was smudged. Chloe looked like she'd been crying, and Brad looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. The restaurant went quiet as they marched toward my table. I could feel every eye in the place watching the drama unfold. Nick! Miranda's voice was shrill enough to shatter glass. What the hell have you done? I took a sip of my coffee and looked up at her calmly. Good morning, Miranda. You look tired. Didn't sleep well? Don't play games with me. My cards are canceled, I can't get into the house, and the hotel wouldn't take my credit card. That's unfortunate. Have you tried asking your real husband to pay for things? Brad stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Look here, buddy. I stood up slowly. I'm not a big man, 5'10", 170, but I work out regularly, and I've got the kind of quiet confidence that comes from building something from nothing. Brad was bigger, but he had the soft look of a man who'd spent more time in bars than gyms. I'm sorry, who are you again? I asked, my voice perfectly polite. I'm Chloe's father. Ah, right, the real father. The one who's going to take care of his family now. Congratulations, Brad, you've got the job. Chloe burst into tears. This is insane. You can't just throw us out. I didn't throw anyone out, sweetheart. You threw me out. Remember? If you're not satisfied, get out. Well, I got out. Now you're free to build your perfect little family without my money getting in the way. Miranda's face was turning red. You're being vindictive and petty. I'm being practical. You made it very clear that I'm not part of the family, so I stopped acting like I was. Tom Rodriguez appeared at my shoulder, having emerged from the kitchen where he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Is there a problem here, Mr. Everett? No problem, Tom. These people were just leaving. Miranda looked around the restaurant, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her. You can't ban me from public establishments. Actually, I can. These are private businesses, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone. You're no longer welcome in any of my restaurants. This is illegal. No, Miranda, this is business. Brad finally found his voice. Come on, man, be reasonable. We can work this out. I sat back down and picked up my fork. You're absolutely right, Brad. You can work it out. You're the real father, you're the real husband. So start acting like it. Get a job, get an apartment, take care of your family. That's what real men do. The silence stretched for a full 30 seconds before Miranda grabbed Chloe's arm and marched toward the door. Brad followed them, but not before turning back to me. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's just beginning. By noon, the story had spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. Small towns are ecosystems, And when you disturb one part, everything else shifts to accommodate the change. Miranda's public humiliation at the Copper Kettle was the talk of every coffee shop, beauty salon, and office water cooler in town. Jules called me at 1 p.m. Jesus, Nick, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. Everyone wants to know what happened. What are you telling them? The truth, that Miranda kicked you out of your own house on Christmas so her ex could play house, and you decided to stop funding their lifestyle. Most people think you're a hero. Most people? Karen Walsh and Tessa Morrison are telling anyone who'll listen that you're an abusive control freak who's using money to manipulate your family. I'd been expecting this. Karen and Tessa were Miranda's closest friends, and they'd been complicit in last night's ambush. They were also the kind of women who'd never worked a day in their lives, living off their husband's success while pretending to be independent. What else? Brad's been making the rounds, trying to find someone to loan him money. Apparently, he owes some people in Detroit, and they're not the patient type. This was interesting news. What kind of people? The kind who break kneecaps when payments are late. Word is he came back to Cedar Falls because Detroit got too hot for him. I made a mental note to have Tom look into this. If Brad had brought criminal problems to my town, that was information I could use. At 3 p.m., I was in my office when Sarah called. Nick, I've got good news and bad news. Give me the bad news first. Miranda hired Patricia Webb as her attorney. She's filing for emergency spousal support and temporary custody of marital assets. Patricia Webb was the most aggressive divorce attorney in the county. She specialized in taking wealthy men to the cleaners, and she was very good at her job. What's the good news? She doesn't have a leg to stand on. Michigan is a no-fault state, but infidelity still matters when it comes to asset division. And since everything is in your name, and you have clear evidence of her affair, she's fighting an uphill battle. How long do we have before the hearing? 3 days. But Nick, there's something else. Webb is going to argue that you are financially abusing Miranda and Chloe. She's going to paint you as a controlling husband who uses money as a weapon. Let her try. I've got 7 years of bank records showing exactly how much I've spent on Miranda's lifestyle. If supporting someone to the tune of $200,000 a year is financial misuse, then I'm guilty as charged. After hanging up with Sarah, I decided it was time to take a more proactive approach. I called my head chef at Riverside Grill, Marco Santos. Marco, I need you to do something for me. Call every supplier we use and let them know that Miranda Everett is no longer authorized to make purchases on our accounts. Already done, boss. But you should know, she tried to order $5,000 worth of catering for some kind of party this weekend. When I told her the account was closed, she lost her mind. What kind of party? Something about showing people that she's not going to be intimidated. She wanted to host it at the country club. The Cedar Falls Country Club was where Miranda's social circle gathered to gossip and compete over who had the most expensive handbag. If she was planning some kind of public event, she was trying to control the narrative. Marco, I want you to call the country club and let them know that any event hosted by Miranda Everett should not be catered by us. In fact, make sure they know we're not available for any events involving her or her friends. What about their New Year's Eve gala? We've catered that for 3 years running. Cancel it. Tell them we're booked. Boss, that's a $20,000 contract. I don't care. Some things are worth more than money. At 5 p.m., I was reviewing quarterly reports when Tom knocked on my office door. Come in. Tom entered with a manila folder under his arm and the expression of a man who'd found something interesting. I did some digging on Brad Harlan like you asked. What did you find? He's in debt to a loan shark named Vincent Torino. Owes him $47,000, and the interest is compounding daily. Torino's crew has been looking for Brad for 6 months. How do you know all this? I still have friends in Detroit PD. Brad's been on their radar for a while. Small-time stuff mostly, check fraud, identity theft, running cons on lonely women. But Torino's not small-time. He's connected and he doesn't forgive debts. This was better than I'd hoped. How long before Torino's people track him down? In a town this size, a week, maybe 2, unless Brad comes up with the money fast. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Brad wasn't just a deadbeat father and a homewrecker. He was a criminal who'd brought dangerous people into Miranda's life, into Chloe's life. Tom, I want you to make sure word gets out about Brad's situation, discreetly. Let people know that he's not just a harmless loser. He's a man running from serious trouble. Consider it done. But boss, What if Torino's people come looking for him here? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I want everyone in town to know exactly what kind of man Miranda chose over me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what's coming. This is just the beginning. I showed the message to Tom, who frowned. Probably Brad trying to sound tough. Want me to trace the number? No, let him play his games. He has no idea who he's dealing with. But as I sat in my office that evening, watching the snow fall outside my window, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more complicated. The next morning brought news that changed everything. I was having coffee at the Copper Kettle when Sonia approached my table with a worried expression. Boss, you need to see this. She handed me her phone, which was displaying the Cedar Falls community Facebook page. Miranda had posted a long, emotional message that was already generating dozens of comments. I want everyone to know what kind of man Nick Everett really is. Yesterday, he threw his family out on the street because I made one mistake. He's using his money and his restaurants to punish me and my daughter for not being perfect. He's banned us from public places, canceled our credit cards, and locked us out of our own home. This is what financial misuse looks like. This is what happens when a controlling man doesn't get his way. I'm sharing this because I don't want other women to go through what I'm going through. Money should never be used as a weapon. The post had been shared 43 times and was generating a heated debate in the comments. Some people were supporting Miranda, calling me a monster. Others were defending me, pointing out that she'd cheated on me and humiliated me publicly. But the damage was being done. Miranda was playing the sufferer card, and it was working. How bad is it? I asked Sonia. Mixed. But Karen Walsh and Tessa Morrison are all over social media backing up her story. They're saying you've been emotionally abusive for years. I handed back the phone and tried to process this development. Miranda was smarter than I'd given her credit for. She was turning my strategic response into evidence of my supposed cruelty. My phone rang. Sarah. Nick, we have a problem. Webb is using Miranda's Facebook post as evidence in her emergency filing. She's arguing that you're engaging in a pattern of financial misuse and emotional manipulation. Can she do that? She can try. The judge might grant temporary support just to avoid the appearance of allowing financial misuse. You need to be prepared for the possibility that you'll have to restore some of Miranda's access while the divorce proceeds. This was not the outcome I'd been planning for. What's our next move? We fight back, but carefully. Any response you make will be scrutinized by the court. Don't post anything on social media, don't make any public statements, and whatever you do, don't give them any ammunition to use against you. After hanging up, I sat in my restaurant trying to figure out how to respond to Miranda's public relations campaign. That's when Jules walked in, followed by someone I didn't expect to see. Detective Lisa Chen from the Cedar Falls Police Department. Nick, we need to talk, Jules said, his expression serious. What's going on? Detective Chen sat down across from me. Mr. Everett, we received a complaint this morning alleging that you're stalking and maltreating your estranged wife. That's ridiculous. I haven't contacted her since yesterday morning. The complaint alleges that you're using your business connections to systematically isolate Mrs. Everett from the community. It also mentions threats made against her companion, Brad Harlan. I looked at Jules, who shrugged apologetically. Brad filed the complaint. Claims you threatened him at the restaurant yesterday. I never threatened anyone. I told him he could take care of his own family instead of expecting me to do it. Detective Chen pulled out a notebook. Mr. Harlan claims you said, "This isn't over, and it's just beginning." He interpreted those as threats. He said, "This isn't over" to me. I simply agreed with him. Look, Nick, Chen said, closing her notebook. I've known you for 5 years. You're not the type to make threats, but I have to follow up on complaints. Just be careful how you handle this situation. Emotions are running high, and people are looking for reasons to escalate things. After Chen left, Jules sat down heavily. This is getting out of hand fast. No, this is exactly what I expected. Miranda's not going to go quietly. She's going to fight dirty. So what's the plan? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Tom. Boss, you need to get down to Riverside Grill immediately. We have a situation. What kind of situation? The kind that involves broken windows and spray paint. I drove to Riverside Grill with Jules following in his truck. When we arrived, I found Tom standing in front of the restaurant with his arms crossed, staring at the damage. Someone had thrown a brick through the front window and spray-painted "Misuser" across the front door in red letters. Any witnesses? I asked. Mrs. Patterson from across the street saw three people around 2 a.m., two women and a man. She couldn't make out faces, but the description matches Miranda, Chloe, and Brad. Security cameras. They knew exactly where the cameras were, stayed in the blind spots. This was planned. I stared at the damage, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was war. Tom, call the police and file a report. Then call our insurance company. I want this cleaned up before dinner service. Already on it, but boss, there's something else. I got word that Brad's been asking around about your schedule, wants to know when you'll be alone. Jules stepped closer. Nick, maybe it's time to consider backing down. This is escalating fast. I looked at the spray paint dripping down my restaurant's door and made a decision that would change everything. No, I'm not backing down, but we're going to change tactics. What do you mean? I mean it's time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Miranda wants to paint me as the villain? Fine. But villains don't just react, they act. That evening, I made a series of phone calls that would shift the balance of power in this war. The first call was to Vincent Torino's office in Detroit. Mr. Torino, my name is Nick Everett. I believe you're looking for Brad Harlan. I know where he is. Vincent Torino was exactly what I'd expected. A soft-spoken man in his 50s who dressed like a banker and talked like a philosophy professor. We met at a truck stop halfway between Cedar Falls and Detroit, neutral ground where neither of us had the advantage. Mr. Everett, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. I appreciate you reaching out. It's not often that citizens volunteer information about people I'm looking for. Brad Harlan brought his problems to my town. That makes it my business. Torino smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I understand Mr. Harlan has been enjoying the hospitality of your home. Not anymore. He's currently staying at the Riverside Motel on Highway 9, room 23. But I should mention, he's under police protection due to some domestic issues. Domestic issues? He's involved in my divorce. The police are treating any conflict involving him as potential domestic violence. Torino nodded thoughtfully. That does complicate things. I'm a businessman, Mr. Everett. I avoid unnecessary complications. What if the complications disappeared? How so? What if Brad left town voluntarily, tonight, and never came back to Cedar Falls? That would certainly solve my immediate problem, but it wouldn't solve the larger issue of what he owes me. I slid a cashier's check across the table. $47,000 plus interest. Torino looked at the check, but didn't touch it. This is very generous, Mr. Everett. What do you want in return? I want Brad gone, permanently, and I want him to take full responsibility for destroying my marriage when he leaves. You want him to confess to infidelity. I want him to tell the truth, in writing, signed and notarized. Torino picked up the check and examined it carefully. This is a very expensive confession, Mr. Everett. It's worth every penny. An hour later, I was back in Cedar Falls, waiting in my office for the next phase of my plan to unfold. Tom was monitoring police scanners, and Jules was positioned across from the motel with a clear view of Brad's room. At 11:47 p.m., Jules called. 3 black SUVs just pulled into the motel parking lot. This is happening fast. Any police response? Not yet. Wait, Brad just came out of his room. He looks scared crapless. I could hear voices in the background of Jules's call, but couldn't make out words. Then Jules spoke again. They're talking. Brad's gesturing a lot. Now he's going back into his room. The SUVs are waiting. 20 minutes later, Jules called back. Brad just came out with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. He's getting into the middle SUV. They're leaving. Follow them, but stay back. Already on it. Jules followed the convoy to the interstate, where they headed south toward Detroit. Brad Harlan was leaving Cedar Falls exactly the way he'd arrived, as someone else's problem. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my office door. Inside was a handwritten confession signed by Brad Harlan and notarized by a Detroit public notary. I, Bradley James Harlan, do hereby confess that I deliberately seduced Miranda Everett while she was married to Nicholas Everett. I manipulated her emotions and convinced her to betray her marriage vows. I used her daughter, Chloe, to gain access to the Everett home and family. I take full responsibility for the destruction of the Everett marriage. Nicholas Everett is not responsible for my actions or their consequences. I am leaving Cedar Falls voluntarily and will never return. It was exactly what I needed for the divorce proceedings, but more importantly, it was the truth. I called Sarah and read her the confession. This changes everything, Nick. With this document, Miranda's infidelity case becomes ironclad. She'll have no grounds for spousal support, and her claims of misuse become irrelevant. What about her emergency filing? Dead in the water. When the judge sees this confession, along with the evidence of her affair, he'll dismiss her petition immediately. My next call was to Miranda. She answered on the first ring. Nick, where's Brad? He didn't come back to the motel last night. Brad left town, Miranda. Permanently. What do you mean left town? I mean he's gone, back to Detroit. He won't be returning to Cedar Falls. There was a long silence before Miranda spoke again, and when she did, her voice was shaky. What did you do? I solved a problem. Brad owed money to some very dangerous people. They found him. You called them. You told them where he was. I helped a local businessman collect a legitimate debt. Brad chose to leave rather than face the consequences of his actions. You fool! You absolute fool! Miranda, I'm going to give you one chance to end this quietly. Drop your emergency petition, agree to an uncontested divorce, and I'll make sure you and Chloe are taken care of. Fight me, and I'll use Brad's confession to destroy you in court. I'll never give up. I'll fight you until I hung up. Within an hour, my phone was ringing with calls from Karen Walsh and Tessa Morrison. I didn't answer. I was done talking to people who'd made their choice to stand against me. That afternoon, Miranda showed up at my office with Patricia Webb. They walked in without an appointment, which told me they were desperate. Mr. Everett, Webb said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I think we need to discuss a reasonable settlement. I thought Miranda wanted to fight this in court. Circumstances have changed. My client is willing to be reasonable. I pulled out a copy of Brad's confession and slid it across the desk. Webb read it, her face growing paler with each line. Where did you get this? Brad decided to tell the truth before he left town. He felt bad about destroying my marriage. Miranda was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Nick, please. I made a mistake. Can't we work this out? You didn't make a mistake, Miranda. You made a choice. You chose to humiliate me in front of my friends and family. You chose to bring another man into my home. You chose to let your daughter disrespect me. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. What do you want? Webb asked. I want an uncontested divorce. Miranda keeps her personal belongings and her car. Everything else stays with me. No alimony, no spousal support, no claims on my business or property. That's hardly fair? Fair, I stood up. What's fair is that I supported Miranda and her daughter for 7 years. What's fair is that I built a life for people who threw me away the moment something better came along. What's fair is that I'm offering her anything at all instead of leaving her with nothing. Webb looked at Miranda, who was still crying. We need time to consider. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, we go to court, and I use Brad's confession to prove infidelity and abandonment. Miranda will leave with nothing but the clothes on her back. They left without another word. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing the documents that would end my marriage. 7 years reduced to legal paperwork and signatures. It should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like completion, the final step in a process that had started long before Christmas dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You won? Are you happy now? I typed back. I'm free. That's better than happy. The response came immediately. You'll regret this. I turned off my phone and poured myself a whiskey. Let Miranda have the last word. I had the last laugh. The next morning brought an unexpected twist. I arrived at my office to find Detective Chen waiting in the parking lot with 2 other officers. Mr. Everett, we need to talk. What's this about? Brad Harlan's disappearance. His mother filed a missing person report in Detroit. She claims you were the last person to see him alive. I felt a chill run down my spine. Brad left town voluntarily. I have witnesses. We're going to need you to come to the station and answer some questions. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in an interview room while Detective Chen and a detective from Detroit, PE asked me the same questions over and over again. When did I last see Brad? Did I threaten him? Did I know anyone who might want to hurt him? I told them the truth, that Brad had left town to avoid his creditors, and that I had witnessed his departure. What I didn't tell them was that I'd facilitated his departure by paying his debts. Finally, Chen's phone rang. She stepped out to take the call, leaving me alone with the Detroit detective, a hard-looking man named Rodriguez. "You know what I think happened?" Rodriguez said. "I think you got tired of this punk messing with your wife, so you called some people you shouldn't have called. I think you watched too many movies. Maybe. But guys like Torino don't just forgive $47,000 debts out of the goodness of their hearts." Before I could respond, Chen returned with a strange expression on her face. "Mr. Everett, you're free to go." "What?" "Brad Harlan just walked into a police station in Miami. He's alive and well, and he confirms your story that he left Cedar Falls voluntarily." Rodriguez looked confused. "Miami? What the hell is he doing in Miami?" "Apparently, he's starting a new life. Says he came into some money and decided to relocate somewhere warm." I tried not to smile as I stood up. "Am I free to go?" "You're free to go." As I walked out of the police station, I called Torino's office from my car. "Mr. Torino, this is Nick Everett. I wanted to thank you for handling our mutual problems so professionally." "Mr. Everett, I'm not sure what you're talking about." "Mr. Harlan paid his debt in full and decided to relocate to Florida. I wish him well in his new endeavors." "Of course. Have a good day." The beautiful thing about dealing with professionals is that they understand the value of clean endings. I drove back to my office, where Sarah was waiting with a stack of papers. "Miranda signed everything," she said. "The divorce is final." "Just like that?" "Just like that. She also wanted me to give you this." Sarah handed me an envelope with my name written in Miranda's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Nick, I know you'll never forgive me for what I did. I don't blame you. I threw away the best thing in my life for a fantasy that lasted exactly one day. I hope someday you'll find someone who deserves you. I wasn't that person, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it. Miranda." I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and it was enough. That afternoon, I reopened Riverside Grill after having the windows replaced and the graffiti removed. The lunch crowd was bigger than usual. Apparently, my divorce drama had made me something of a local celebrity. Sonia approached my table with a grin. "Boss, you've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The good kind. Reservations are booked solid for the next 2 weeks. Apparently, everyone wants to eat at the restaurant owned by the guy who stood up to his cheating wife." "Great, just what I need to be famous for my personal life." "Could be worse. You could be famous for being a pushover." That evening, I sat in my house, not our house, and tried to figure out what came next. I was 39 years old, newly divorced, and completely free for the first time in 7 years. It should have felt liberating, but instead, it felt empty. My phone rang. Jules. "Nick, you need to turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote and switched to the local news. The anchor was reading a story about my divorce, complete with footage of Miranda leaving the courthouse in tears. Local restaurant owner Nicholas Everett finalized his divorce today from Miranda Everett, ending a marriage that became the center of controversy when Mrs. Everett's affair became public knowledge. The couple's Christmas Day separation made headlines when Mr. Everett reportedly cut off his wife's access to their joint finances after discovering her infidelity. The story continued for another minute, painting me as either a hero or a villain, depending on who they interviewed. Karen Walsh called me a controlling monster, while several of my restaurant customers praised me for standing up for himself. I turned off the TV and poured myself a drink. In the space of 1 week, I'd gone from being a happily married restaurant owner to being the most talked about man in Cedar Falls. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations, you got everything you wanted." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Miranda was right. I had gotten everything I wanted. The question was whether it was worth what I'd paid for it. 2 weeks later, I was closing up Everett's fine dining when I noticed a woman sitting alone at the bar. She was attractive, probably mid-30s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. What caught my attention was that she'd been nursing the same glass of wine for an hour, occasionally glancing in my direction. I walked over and sat down beside her. "I'm Nick Everett. I own this place." "I know who you are. I'm Jennifer Walsh, Karen's sister." That explained the glances. Karen Walsh had been one of Miranda's most vocal supporters during the divorce. "I suppose you're here to tell me what a terrible person I am." Jennifer laughed. "Actually, I'm here to tell you that my sister is an idiot." "Excuse me? Karen's been trash-talking you for 2 weeks, but she conveniently leaves out the part where Miranda cheated on you and humiliated you in front of your entire family. She also leaves out the part where she and Tessa helped plan the whole thing. This was news to me. They helped plan it? Karen knew about the affair for months. She's the one who suggested that Miranda bring Brad to Christmas dinner, said it would force you to accept the situation. I felt anger rising in my chest. They orchestrated the whole thing. They thought you'd roll over and accept it. Karen was convinced you'd never leave Miranda because you were too dependent on her for social status. Social status? Karen thinks all men are desperate for trophy wives. She couldn't understand that some people actually marry for love. I studied Jennifer's face, looking for signs of deception. Why are you telling me this? Because I've watched you build your businesses from nothing over the past 5 years. I've seen how you treat your employees, how you contribute to the community. You're not the monster Karen's making you out to be. What do you do for a living, Jennifer? I'm a forensic accountant. I work for the state attorney general's office. Investigating what? Tax fraud, money laundering, business corruption, the usual white-collar crimes. An idea began forming in my mind. Have you ever looked into Karen's husband's business practices? Jennifer smiled. Funny you should ask. Robert Walsh's construction company has been on our radar for 6 months. We think he's been inflating government contracts and skimming money from municipal projects. Think? We know. We just haven't been able to prove it yet. I leaned closer. What would you need to prove it? Access to his financial records. But that requires a warrant, and we don't have enough evidence for a judge to sign one. What if someone with legitimate business reasons needed to examine those records? That would be different. If someone was considering a business partnership with Walsh Construction, they might reasonably request financial documentation. I pulled out my phone and called Tom Rodriguez. Tom, I need you to draw up a proposal for Walsh Construction to bid on the renovation of Riverside Grill. Make it a big job, something that would require detailed financial disclosure. Boss, we just renovated Riverside Grill 6 months ago. We're expanding, adding a private event space. I want Robert Walsh to think this is the biggest contract of his career. After hanging up, I turned back to Jennifer. How long would you need to examine his books? A few hours, maybe less, if he's as sloppy as I think he is. And if you find what you're looking for, Robert Walsh goes to prison for fraud and tax evasion. His assets get frozen, his business gets shut down, and Karen loses everything. The irony was beautiful. Karen had helped destroy my marriage, and now her husband's corruption was going to destroy her life. There's something else you should know, Jennifer said. Karen's been spreading rumors that you're connected to organized crime. She's telling people that you had Brad eliminated. Brad's alive and well in Miami. I know, but Karen doesn't know that. She thinks you're some kind of criminal mastermind. Maybe I should start charging for that reputation. Jennifer laughed. You know, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone bitter and angry, someone consumed with revenge. I was never angry about the divorce. I was angry about the betrayal. There's a difference. What's the difference? Divorce is just paperwork. Betrayal is personal. Over the next week, I watched Robert Walsh take the bait. He submitted a proposal for the Riverside Grill expansion that was 30% higher than any legitimate bid should have been. More importantly, he included detailed financial statements showing his company's assets and cash flow. Jennifer worked through the documents over a weekend, and on Monday morning, she called me with the results. We've got him. Inflated invoices, phantom employees, kickbacks from subcontractors, the whole 9 yards. He's been stealing from the city for 3 years. How much? At least $200,000, maybe more. When do you arrest him? Wednesday morning. We'll hit his office and his house simultaneously. I made sure to be at the Copper Kettle on Wednesday morning when the news broke. The arrest of Robert Walsh was the biggest scandal to hit Cedar Falls in years. The local news crews were everywhere, and the story dominated social media. Karen's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. She went from being the queen of Cedar Falls society to being the wife of a convicted felon overnight. Her friends abandoned her, her social clubs expelled her, and her perfect life crumbled in exactly the same way she'd tried to destroy mine. The beautiful thing about justice is that it's often self-inflicted. That afternoon, I got a call from Tessa Morrison. Nick, we need to talk. I don't think we have anything to talk about, Tessa. It's about Karen. She's talking about doing something stupid. What kind of stupid? She blames you for Robert's arrest. She thinks you set him up. Robert set himself up when he started stealing from the city. She doesn't see it that way. She's drinking heavily and she's making threats. What kind of threats? She says she's going to make you pay for destroying her life. I thought about this for a moment. Karen Walsh was a desperate woman who'd lost everything, and desperate people were capable of anything. Tessa, if Karen comes near me or my businesses, I'll have her arrested. Make sure she understands that. I'm trying, but she's not listening to reason. Then that's her problem. I hung up and called Tom Rodriguez. Tom, I need you to increase security at all 3 restaurants. We might have a problem with Karen Walsh. What kind of problem? The kind that involves a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. That evening, I was working late in my office when the alarm system activated. Tom's voice came over the intercom. Boss, we've got movement in the parking lot. 3 people approaching the building. I looked at the security monitors and saw Karen Walsh, Tessa Morrison, and a man I didn't recognize walking toward my office door. Karen was carrying something in her hand. It looked like a baseball bat. Tom, call the police and activate the external cameras. Already done. I watched the monitors as Karen approached my door and started beating on it with the bat. She was screaming something, but the sound was muffled. Tessa was trying to pull her away, but Karen pushed her aside. The man with them looked nervous. He kept glancing around like he expected the police to arrive at any moment. 5 minutes later, patrol cars surrounded the building. Karen was arrested for vandalism and making threats. Tessa and the unknown man were questioned and released. The next morning, I found another envelope under my office door. This one was from Tessa. Nick, I'm sorry about last night. Karen's lost her mind and I can't control her anymore. I wanted you to know that I never supported what Miranda did to you. I went along with it because Karen convinced me it was for the best, but I was wrong. You deserve better than what we all gave you. I'm leaving Cedar Falls. There's nothing left for me here. Tessa. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer next to Miranda's apology. 2 down, 1 to go. Karen Walsh was sentenced to 6 months in county jail for vandalism and maltreatment. Her husband got 3 years in federal prison for fraud. Their house was seized by the government, their assets were frozen, and their perfect life became a cautionary tale about the consequences of greed and betrayal. I felt no satisfaction in their destruction. It was simply the natural result of their choices, just like my divorce had been the natural result of Miranda's choices. Justice isn't revenge, it's balance. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, Cedar Falls had settled into a new normal. My restaurants were more successful than ever, thanks partly to the publicity from my very public divorce and partly to the fact that I was now completely focused on my business without the distractions of a failing marriage. Miranda had moved to Grand Rapids with Chloe, where she was working as a real estate agent and slowly rebuilding her life. We had no contact, which was exactly how I wanted it. Chloe had sent me one text message on my birthday. I'm sorry for how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. I'd replied with, thank you. And that was the end of our relationship. Brad Harlan had indeed started a new life in Miami, where he was reportedly working as a boat mechanic and staying out of trouble. Vincent Torino had kept his word. Brad's debt was considered paid in full, and he was free to live his life without looking over his shoulder. Karen Walsh was serving her sentence in county jail, and her husband was in federal prison. Their house had been sold at auction, and the proceeds were being used to reimburse the city for the money Robert had stolen. Karen would be released in 3 months, but she'd already announced her intention to leave Michigan permanently. Tessa Morrison had moved to California, where she was working for a nonprofit organization that helps sufferers of domestic misuse. She'd sent me a Christmas card with a note saying she was trying to make amends for her past mistakes by helping other people. As for me, then I was learning how to be single again. It wasn't easy. 7 years of marriage had created habits and expectations that were hard to break. But I was discovering that I enjoyed my own company, and I was finally free to make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what would keep peace in my household. Jennifer Walsh had become a regular customer at my restaurants, and we'd developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences with difficult family members. She was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about her own flaws and mistakes. You know what I like about you, Nick? She said one evening as we shared a bottle of wine at Everett's Fine Dining. What's that? You don't pretend to be perfect. Most men who've been through what you've been through would either be bitter or would be trying to convince everyone that they were completely innocent. I wasn't innocent. I ignored warning signs for months because I didn't want to deal with the truth. What warning signs? Miranda started pulling away about a year ago. She stopped talking to me about her day, stopped asking about mine. She started going out more often with Karen and Tessa, and she always came home in a strange mood, either overly affectionate or completely cold. Did you confront her about it? I tried, but she always had an explanation. She was stressed about Chloe starting college. She was worried about her mother's health. She was having problems with her friends. There was always something. So you chose to believe her. I chose to avoid conflict. I thought if I just worked harder, made more money, gave her more attention, whatever was wrong would fix itself. That's not how relationships work. I know that now. But at the time, I thought love was supposed to be easy. I thought if two people really cared about each other, they'd naturally work through their problems. Jennifer laughed. You were married to the wrong person, Nick. Love isn't easy, but it shouldn't be impossible either. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I began to realize that my marriage to Miranda had been doomed long before Brad Harlan came back to town. We'd simply been going through the motions, pretending to be happy while we slowly grew apart. The Christmas dinner confrontation hadn't destroyed my marriage, it had simply revealed that my marriage was already dead. 1 year after my divorce, I threw a party at Riverside Grill to celebrate the restaurant's 5th anniversary. The entire staff was there, along with regular customers, business partners, and friends. It was the kind of celebration I'd never been able to have while I was married because Miranda would have insisted on controlling every detail. Jules gave a speech that made everyone laugh. 5 years ago, Nick opened this restaurant with a dream and a prayer. 3 years ago, he added Everett's Fine Dining. 2 years ago, he bought the copper kettle. And 1 year ago, he got rid of his biggest expense, his ex-wife. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. I stood up to respond, looking around at the faces of people who'd supported me through the worst year of my life. A year ago, I thought my life was over, I said. I thought losing my marriage meant losing everything that mattered. What I discovered was that I hadn't lost anything. I'd simply stopped carrying dead weight. More laughter and applause. I learned that the people who matter will stand by you when things get difficult. The people who don't matter will abandon you the moment it becomes inconvenient to support you. The trick is knowing the difference. After the party, Jennifer and I walked along the river that ran through downtown Cedar Falls. It was a warm June evening, and the town was alive with summer energy. Do you ever regret how you handled the divorce? She asked. I thought about the question for a long time before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Miranda and I couldn't find a way to work through our problems. I regret that Chloe got caught in the middle of something that wasn't her fault. But do you regret fighting back? No. If I'd rolled over and accepted what they did to me, I'd have spent the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd stood up for myself. Even though it cost you your marriage, my marriage was already over. Fighting back just made it official. We stopped walking and stood on the bridge that crossed the river. Below us, the water reflected the lights from the restaurants and shops along the riverbank. What happens now? Jennifer asked. Now I figure out what the rest of my life looks like. I'm 39 years old. I own 3 successful businesses, and I have no obligations to anyone but myself. That's either terrifying or liberating, depending on how you look at it. How do you look at it? Both. Jennifer laughed. You know, there's something I never told you about the night Karen got arrested. What's that? She wasn't just angry about Robert's arrest. She was angry because she'd lost the bet. What bet? She and Tessa had a bet about how long it would take you to crawl back to Miranda begging for forgiveness. Karen said 2 weeks. Tessa said a month. Neither of them thought you'd actually fight for yourself. I felt a surge of satisfaction at this revelation. How much was the bet? $1,000. Who would have collected if I'd crawled back? Karen. She was so sure you didn't have the backbone to stand up to Miranda. I guess she was wrong about a lot of things. She was wrong about everything. About you, about Miranda, about what would happen if she helped destroy your marriage. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the river flow beneath us. Finally, Jennifer spoke again. Nick, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you ready to trust someone again? I looked at her, understanding the real question she was asking. I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. She smiled and took my hand. That's all anyone can ask for. As we walked back toward town, I thought about the year that had passed since that Christmas dinner. I'd lost a wife, a stepdaughter, and several people I'd thought were friends. But I'd gained something more valuable. I'd gained myself back. The man who'd sat at that Christmas table and accepted humiliation without fighting back was gone. In his place was someone who understood that respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes, earning it means being willing to lose everything to keep it. I was 40 years old, newly single, and completely free to make my own choices for the first time in 7 years. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And that was enough.